My name's Elias. I've spent the last 10 years working as a park ranger, a job I always believed suited my roots and passion for nature. But nothing could have prepared me for what I experienced in the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. I grew up hearing tales of the mountains, stories passed down from my grandparents about spirits that watched over the land, ancient beings that weren't meant to be disturbed. As a child, these stories fascinated me, but as I grew older, I brushed them off as myths. That was my first mistake. When a colleague suggested a hike deep into the mountains, far from any beaten trail, I eagerly agreed. We were both trained rangers. What could possibly go wrong? The air was colder than I expected, and silence blanketed the woods. Not the usual peaceful silence, but something heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. My companion and I didn't speak much, and I noticed we were both glancing over our shoulders more than usual. An hour into our hike, I found myself feeling inexplicably uneasy. The trees seemed to close in around us, and the sky grew darker, despite it still being early afternoon. It was then that we stumbled upon something. A circle of stones arranged around a mound of earth, each stone covered in strange markings that looked freshly carved. I felt a chill run down my spine. We had strict guidelines about respecting cultural sites, but this felt different. Something about the place made my skin crawl. I urged my friend to leave, but he laughed it off, saying it was probably just some prank or an old campfire site. I tried to shake the feeling that something was watching us, but it only grew stronger as we continued. Shadows seemed to dart between the trees, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. The silence that had once been peaceful was now oppressive, suffocating. The last straw came when we heard a low, guttural sound echoing from the trees. It wasn't any animal I knew, and I've encountered plenty in these woods. My friend tried to reassure me, but I could see the fear in his eyes. As the sound grew closer, we decided it was time to head back. But no matter which direction we took, it seemed like we were walking in circles. Panic began to set in as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I felt a cold sweat on my skin as I realized we were lost in a place we had been trained to navigate. Nightfall brought with it a bone-chilling wind and the sounds of branches snapping. Only there was no wind strong enough to cause it. Whatever was following us was getting closer. We eventually made it out of those mountains, but I left a part of myself behind. Something in me changed, like a weight pressing down on my soul. The forest hasn't felt the same since, and I can no longer walk its trails without looking over my shoulder, fearing what might be lurking in the shadows. If you ever find yourself tempted to explore the Alaskan wilderness, heed my warning. Some places are better left untouched, and some paths are better left untraveled. Don't make the same mistake I did. Don't ignore the stories and the warnings. Those mountains hold secrets, and they don't take kindly to intruders. When I first became a park ranger, I thought I understood the land and its mysteries. I'd spent countless hours hiking the same trails, patrolling the forests, and reading the terrain like a second language. As a native of Alaska, I believed the wilderness was in my blood. Each rock, tree, and river had a story to tell, and I was always eager to listen. But nothing prepared me for what I encountered when I ventured into the deeper reaches of the Alaskan mountains, where few people ever dared to go. My name is Elias, and I was born and raised in a small village near the Alaskan wilderness. Growing up, my grandfather often told me stories of the spirits that inhabited these mountains, their presence woven into the fabric of our culture. He spoke of ancient beings who roamed the land long before humans, guarding it from harm. These spirits were said to be protectors, but they were not benevolent to those who intruded on their sacred ground. Respect the land, my grandfather would always say, and it will respect you, but trespass and you'll answer to the mountain. I didn't fully understand the weight of his words as a child, but they lingered in my mind throughout my adult life. As a ranger, I believed in the sanctity of nature. I enforced the rules of the park, protecting the wildlife and ensuring that visitors treated the land with the respect it deserved. But there's a difference between respecting nature from afar and truly understanding its deeper, darker secrets. The Alaskan wilderness is not a place where human curiosity is always welcomed, and I was about to learn that lesson the hard way. The decision to venture into the mountains wasn't mine alone. I had a colleague, a fellow ranger named Matt, who had heard the same rumors I had. We'd heard whispers about strange occurrences deep in the park, disappearances, odd sounds, and inexplicable sights. At first, it sounded like local folklore or exaggerated tales spun by the few who had ventured too far into the unknown. But as we spoke with others who had worked in the area for years, the stories began to accumulate and take on an undeniable weight. Matt was a seasoned ranger, but he was also the type to dismiss folklore in favor of logical explanations. He pushed me to join him on an expedition deeper into the mountains, promising that it would be a routine hike to investigate some of the oddities. It didn't seem like a bad idea at the time. We were both trained for the harsh conditions of the Alaskan wilderness, and the park had been growing in popularity. If we could discover what was causing the rumors, we'd clear up the mystery once and for all. At first, it felt like just another hike, nothing unusual about it. The towering trees, the crisp air, and the rugged terrain that defined the Alaskan wilderness. But as we pressed further into the mountains, something started to feel wrong. It wasn't the landscape that had changed, but the way we both began to feel. A sense of being watched, of being followed, even though we were alone. Matt, ever the skeptic, chalked it up to the wilderness playing tricks on our minds. He laughed it off, tried to make light of the strange noises we heard, the way the wind seemed to howl in patterns that didn't match the direction of the weather. But I couldn't shake the sense that something was out there, something that wasn't quite right. As a ranger, I've learned to read the environment, the subtle signs that tell you whether you're safe or in danger. But in the Alaskan mountains, nothing made sense. It wasn't until we stumbled upon that strange stone circle deep in the forest that I realized the true nature of what we were dealing with. It looked like an ancient site, rocks arranged in a perfect circle, marked with symbols I had never seen before. It felt like we had uncovered something old, something forgotten by time. My grandfather's stories echoed in my mind, about spirits that haunted these mountains, ancient protectors who weren't afraid to defend what was theirs. I tried to keep calm, but a primal instinct kicked in. The sense of dread that had been growing in the pit of my stomach only intensified as we stood there. I urged Matt to leave, to get back to the more familiar trails, but he dismissed my fears as superstition. He told me to stop overthinking things and pushed forward, eager to continue exploring. Reluctantly, I followed him. As we moved away from the stone circle, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. It was more than just the rustling of leaves or the snap of a twig underfoot. There was something there, something hidden, watching us. Every step we took seemed to echo, like the land itself was remembering our presence. The mountains were ancient, older than anything I could comprehend. They were alive in ways that went beyond biology or geology. The moment we heard the low, guttural sound in the distance, I knew we had crossed a line. It was too late to turn back, and I began to feel a cold dread that seemed to seep into my bones. That was the moment I understood the truth. These mountains weren't just a place. They were a living entity, and we had unknowingly walked into its domain. The further we ventured, the more the land seemed to twist. The trees began to grow closer together, their gnarled branches forming a canopy that blocked out the sunlight. Shadows lurked in the corners of my vision, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was silently stalking us. And then, the veil of silence fell. The wind stopped. The birds ceased their songs. The forest held its breath, waiting for something. That was when I knew. The mountains had claimed us. In that moment, everything changed. I wasn't just a ranger anymore. I wasn't just an observer of nature. I had become a part of it, a piece of a much larger puzzle, one I could no longer escape. If you ever find yourself tempted to explore the Alaskan wilderness, remember this: some places are better left untouched. Some mysteries aren't meant to be uncovered. The mountains have a way of keeping their secrets, and once you enter, you may not ever be the same. As the hours passed, our journey deeper into the Alaskan mountains took a turn from curiosity to discomfort. What had started as an adventurous exploration soon began to feel like a descent into something far more sinister. I had been a ranger for 2 decades, and I thought I had seen it all. But nothing in my extensive training could have prepared me for what we were about to face in the heart of these mountains. The day had been clear when we first set out, but as we moved further from the familiar trails, the landscape began to change. The trees grew taller and denser, their branches intertwining overhead, creating a thick canopy that blocked out much of the sunlight. The air grew colder, sharper, and the silence of the wilderness became almost oppressive. The usual sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling were replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed unnatural. The only noise was the crunch of snow beneath our boots and our occasional conversations, though those too began to fade away as we ventured into more remote parts of the park. I had heard the rumors about these mountains, the whispers of strange occurrences and disappearances. But like Matt, I had always dismissed them as local legends, mere ghost stories passed down by old-timers. However, now that I was here, I couldn't ignore the feeling gnawing at me. Something was wrong. Matt seemed oblivious to the creeping sense of dread that had taken root in me. He was excited, his energy infectious, as he spoke about how incredible it would be to uncover the secrets of this part of the park. He pointed out animal tracks, discussed the geology of the area, and made light of my growing unease. But as the hours dragged on, his attitude shifted. His casual remarks grew more strained, his eyes scanning the trees as though expecting something to move just beyond his vision. I tried to brush it off, but the tension was palpable. The deeper we went, the more the landscape seemed to change. The snow-covered ground gave way to rocky terrain, and the jagged peaks that surrounded us loomed ever closer, like silent sentinels keeping watch over us. A sense of being trapped began to weigh heavily on my chest, and I found myself checking our map more frequently, looking for a way out. At some point during the afternoon, we came across something that should have been impossible, an isolated area where the snow didn't seem to accumulate. The ground beneath our feet was bare, the earth exposed in patches. At first, I thought it was a strange anomaly, a pocket of warmth in the otherwise cold environment. But as we ventured further into the area, the strange nature of the spot became more apparent. The ground was uneven, as if it had been disturbed, unnatural cracks running through it, as though something was pushing up from beneath the surface. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Something was wrong. I turned to Matt, but he was already moving forward, eager to inspect the strange patch of land. "Come on, this could be the breakthrough we need," he called out. But I hesitated. It wasn't just the unease that gripped me. It was a warning, something deeper than just instinct. I felt as though we were being watched, as if the mountains themselves were observing our every move. I could feel the presence of something just beyond my reach, something older and far more powerful than any predator I'd encountered before. The wind picked up, whipping through the trees and sending a shiver down my spine. And that's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl, barely audible above the wind. I froze. Matt, seemingly unaware of the growing tension, continued forward, moving further into the strange clearing. His excitement was palpable as he muttered about what could be hidden beneath the surface. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. I scanned the area, my senses straining. The trees seemed to be closing in around us, their dark shapes looming like silent watchers. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something. A flash of movement, too fast to be a person. It was more like a shadow, shifting between the trees. My heart began to race. "Matt!" I called, my voice tight with fear. He didn't respond. I was too far behind to catch up to him before he disappeared into the clearing. The growl I had heard earlier grew louder, closer. It was coming from all around us, a low, rumbling noise that vibrated in my chest. I wanted to call out again, but something in the pit of my stomach told me it would be useless. Whatever was out there didn't want us to be found. I moved quickly, trying to catch up to Matt, but as I passed through the clearing, I felt a strange shift in the air, like the pressure around us had changed. The temperature dropped even further, and I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally, warping around the trees like tendrils of darkness. Then, just as I reached the edge of the clearing, I saw it. A figure emerged from the trees, a tall, grotesque form that seemed to melt into the shadows. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and it moved with an eerie, fluid grace. The creature was unlike anything I had ever seen before, neither animal nor man, but something in between. Its skin was covered in patches of fur, and its face was contorted in a grotesque snarl. My breath caught in my throat. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt frozen, as if the very earth had gripped me in its iron jaws. Before I could react, the creature lunged at Matt. He let out a startled cry, but it was too late. The creature was upon him, its massive claws slashing through the air. I heard the sickening sound of flesh tearing, followed by Matt's desperate screams. I don't know how I managed to move, but instinct drove me forward, grabbing my rifle and taking aim. My hands shook, and the world around me seemed to blur as I fired, the sound of the shot echoing through the mountains. The creature paused for a moment, its gaze locking with mine, its eyes burning with an unnatural intensity. Then, with a final, guttural growl, it vanished into the shadows. But it wasn't over. Something had been awakened in those mountains, something that was now hunting us. We had trespassed too far, and the price for our curiosity was about to be paid. The tale of our harrowing experience in the Alaskan mountains was far from simple. What began as a seemingly straightforward exploration, driven by curiosity and a sense of adventure, quickly morphed into an unsettling journey fraught with unforeseen challenges, both physical and psychological. Beneath the surface of the primary conflict with the creature lurking in the shadows, there were multiple subplots that further complicated our situation, pulling us deeper into the mystery of the mountains and the danger that awaited us. One of the most prominent subplots was the relationship between Matt and me, which slowly began to deteriorate as our journey progressed. Initially, Matt had been the one to push us into the heart of the mountains, eager to uncover the park's secrets. His enthusiasm was contagious, and I followed him without hesitation, driven by a shared sense of wonder. However, as the hours turned into days and the atmosphere grew heavier, our differing perspectives began to surface. I, the seasoned ranger with years of experience in the wild, felt the creeping dread that something was wrong. Matt, on the other hand, remained steadfast in his belief that we were on the verge of discovering something extraordinary. This divergence in our attitudes toward the dangers we faced created tension between us. Matt dismissed my growing unease as paranoia, brushing off every warning I gave him. He became more reckless, venturing deeper into the unknown, while I began to pull back, feeling an instinctive need to turn back before it was too late. There was a sense that we were no longer working together, but were instead drifting apart, each caught in our own personal convictions about what was at stake. This emotional divide reached a breaking point when I caught a glimpse of something in the forest, something I couldn't explain but knew instinctively wasn't natural. I tried to warn Matt, but he was already far ahead, too caught up in his obsession with the mystery of the land. The creature I saw, its glowing eyes and eerie presence, was not just an external threat. It symbolized the growing fracture between us. The danger was no longer just physical, it was psychological. The mountains seemed to feed off our discord, amplifying our fears and doubts. In addition to this rift, there was the subplot of the park itself, a living, breathing entity that held secrets far darker than we could have imagined. The Alaskan wilderness had always been a place of great awe and respect for me, but I began to feel that it was not merely a landscape, but a sentient force with a malevolent will. As we ventured deeper, I noticed subtle changes in the environment. The trees seemed to close in on us, the wind carried whispers that felt deliberate, and the shadows grew longer, more oppressive. It was as though the mountains themselves were aware of our intrusion and were responding to it. The physical features of the park, its cold, barren terrain and looming peaks, took on an increasingly menacing tone, as if they were being reshaped by an unseen power. This connection between the land and the danger we faced introduced a larger question. Was this creature that stalked us an isolated threat, or was it part of something much older and more powerful? The rumors I had heard about the Alaskan wilderness, the cryptic stories shared by local guides and seasoned rangers, began to make more sense. Whispers of ancient beings, cryptids hidden in the mountains, and dark forces that thrived in isolation suddenly felt much more real. The creature we encountered wasn't just a random predator. It was a part of the park's ecosystem, one that had been disturbed by our presence. And it wasn't just hunting us, it was protecting something hidden deep in the heart of the mountains. As if the land itself wasn't enough to contend with, there was another complexity that slowly unraveled over time. The sense that we were not the first to make this fatal mistake. There were signs, disturbing, cryptic markings on trees, remnants of campsites abandoned in haste, and other clues that hinted at previous expeditions that had vanished without a trace. I started to wonder if Matt and I were just the latest in a long line of explorers who had been drawn to these mountains and never returned. The further we ventured, the more I found myself questioning whether we would be the next victims in a long-standing cycle of disappearances. I began to suspect that the creature was not the only danger. The mountains themselves seemed to be a trap, a place designed to lure in curious souls, to feed off their fear, and ultimately to claim them. I wondered if the ancient stories were true, that the land was cursed, or perhaps had been the site of some ancient battle or ritual that left it tainted forever. If the mountains were indeed alive in some way, they seemed to be orchestrating a grim dance, pulling us deeper into its grasp with each passing hour. While I was concerned for my own safety, a deeper fear began to grow in me. Matt had grown increasingly reckless. As the creature's attacks became more frequent and the signs of its presence more pronounced, Matt seemed to become obsessed with uncovering its origin. His drive to discover the truth, to make a name for himself, blinded him to the growing dangers around us. His fearlessness bordered on foolishness, and I found myself growing desperate to protect him from himself. At the same time, I knew that I had to get out of the mountains if we were to survive, no matter what the cost. The complexity of this situation wasn't just the external threat we faced, but the internal battle within myself. As a ranger, I was trained to survive in the wild, but this was different. I was facing a situation where the rules of nature no longer seemed to apply. This was no longer a battle of man versus nature. It was a battle of survival against something far older, far more sinister than I had ever encountered before. Ultimately, the complexity of our predicament boiled down to a single, harrowing question. Would we survive the mountains, or would we become part of its dark legend? The answer lay not only in escaping the creature, but in understanding the true nature of the threat that lurked in the heart of the Alaskan wilderness. The true terror of the mountains wasn't the creature, but the web of dark forces that bound it to the land, and the knowledge that if we didn't find a way to escape, we would never leave. The turning point came on the 5th day of our expedition, under a sky that had never been so still, as though the very air held its breath. The forest surrounding us had grown increasingly unnatural in the way it pressed in on all sides. The trees, once distant and towering, now felt suffocatingly close. Their branches hung like thick, twisted fingers, and the underbrush seemed to shift with a life of its own, the ground uneven and treacherous. The deeper we ventured, the more the sense of being watched grew, a creeping sensation that settled over me like a cold, damp fog. Matt, ever the optimist, hadn't seemed to notice. His excitement at discovering new, uncharted terrain kept him moving forward, oblivious to the warnings my gut had been screaming at me. He was driven by a desire to uncover the secrets of this place, convinced that there was something monumental hidden here, something that would make his name known. I could see the light of obsession in his eyes, that same spark I had seen in many explorers before. They came to the wilderness seeking glory, but they left broken, consumed by what they had uncovered. I had tried to talk to him, to tell him that we were straying too far from safety, but he dismissed my concerns with that familiar, dismissive wave. "You're overthinking it," he'd say, laughing it off. But the laughter had a hollow ring to it. I could feel the tension building between us, the gap widening not just in our objectives, but in our perception of the danger surrounding us. We stopped to camp that evening by a small creek, one that should have been a comforting sight. The sound of running water usually had a calming effect on me, reminding me of the beauty and serenity of nature. But tonight, the sound of the creek seemed distorted, as though it were being distorted by something I couldn't see. The trees overhead creaked and groaned, their branches twisting unnaturally. The wind began to pick up, though there was no real storm in sight, and I found myself staring into the shadowed woods, watching them bend and sway as though something much larger than the trees themselves, was moving within. I tried to ignore it, to force myself to relax, but the feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. I needed to check the perimeter. It was a habit ingrained in me, the duty of a ranger, to never let your guard down in unknown territory. "Matt, I'm going to take a walk," I said quietly, my voice thick with unease. "Stay by the camp." He gave me a half-hearted nod, his attention focused more on the maps spread out in front of him than on my request. But I didn't wait for a response. I grabbed my flashlight and walked away, my boots crunching through the underbrush, my senses on high alert. The forest felt wrong. The further I moved from camp, the more the air seemed to thicken, becoming oppressive and heavy. It was as though the very atmosphere itself had been altered, the energy in the air humming with a strange, unsettling tension. The path I had followed earlier in the day was no longer visible, swallowed up by the dense foliage, and I found myself pushing through thickets of moss-covered branches and tangled vines. The world seemed to narrow, as if the forest itself was closing in around me. Then I heard it, a low, guttural growl, far deeper than any animal I knew of, echoed from the shadows of the trees. I froze, my hand instinctively going to the knife at my side. The growl was followed by a strange clicking sound, like the grinding of stones against each other. I swallowed hard, fighting the surge of panic rising in my chest. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I knew I wasn't alone anymore. It came from the darkness, a shape shifting within the trees, moving with a fluidity that defied the natural laws of the forest. It was large, too large, and the eyes that reflected the light of my flashlight glowed an unnatural shade of amber, with a piercing intensity that sent a chill down my spine. The creature was like nothing I had seen before. It wasn't just an animal. It was something far more sinister, something with a mind of its own, something that had lived in these mountains long before we had ever set foot here. For a long moment, we simply stared at each other, the tension thick enough to cut through. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears, as the creature shifted its weight from one side to the other. My breath hitched as it stepped closer, its eyes never leaving mine. There was something about its presence that felt ancient, like it had been waiting for me, waiting for this moment. And then, as if triggered by some unseen force, the creature lunged forward with incredible speed. I didn't hesitate. I turned and ran, my boots slipping on the wet ground, the flashlight shaking violently in my grip. Behind me, I could hear it, the growl growing louder, closer, as if the creature were toying with me, chasing me for sport. I stumbled and fell, my heart racing, the sound of my breathing loud in my ears. My mind screamed at me to keep running, to keep moving, but my body was betraying me. The forest seemed to twist and contort around me, like a maze designed to keep me lost, keep me from escaping. I could see the glow of the campfire in the distance, a beacon of safety. If only I could make it back. But the sound of the creature's footsteps grew louder, and a horrible realization settled over me. I wasn't going to make it back. This wasn't just a random predator. This was something far more dangerous, something that had a reason to hunt us, to torment us. That was when I heard Matt's voice, faint but unmistakable, calling my name in the distance. His voice cut through the chaos, grounding me for a brief moment. But in the next instant, I heard the creature's growl again, and I knew that Matt, too, was in danger. I made a split-second decision. I had to warn him, no matter the cost. In that instant, I understood. This was the turning point. Our lives weren't just in danger because of some random creature in the woods. We were caught in something much bigger, something far older. The creature was hunting us for a reason, and I had no idea what that reason was. But I knew one thing. I had to get back to Matt, no matter what it took. I was gasping for air, my legs trembling as I pushed myself through the underbrush, desperately trying to make my way back to camp. The forest around me was alive with noises, the rustling of leaves, the distant howling of the wind, and the chilling growl of something far too close for comfort. I could feel the weight of the creature's presence behind me, its eyes searing into the back of my neck with every step I took. It had been following me, stalking me for what felt like an eternity, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep running. But despite the terror rising in my chest, something else settled in, a feeling of dread deeper than fear itself. I wasn't just trying to escape. I was trying to survive, to make sure Matt survived too. The realization hit me like a blow to the gut. This wasn't just a random encounter with an animal. This was something far more dangerous, something that had been lurking in the mountains for far longer than I could comprehend. And it wasn't just me it was after. I had no idea what I was dealing with, but I knew one thing. The creature was connected to the land, to the forest itself. There was a sense of ancient malice in its presence, something older and darker than anything I had ever encountered in my years as a ranger. It wasn't just an animal, it was a force, and we had trespassed into its domain. When I finally broke through the tree line and stumbled back into camp, I found Matt sitting by the fire, still blissfully unaware of the horrors lurking just beyond our sight. He looked up as I approached, his face lighting up with a grin. But that grin faltered when he saw the state I was in, drenched in sweat, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my eyes wide with terror. "What the hell happened?" he asked, standing up. He could see it in my face, the fear that now lived in my chest, gnawing at me. I didn't answer him right away. My eyes scanned the forest, searching for any sign of movement, any sign that the creature was still nearby. But all I could hear was the eerie silence of the woods. No growl, no footsteps, just the crackling of the fire. For a brief moment, I convinced myself that it had been my imagination, that maybe I had been too shaken by the events to process them clearly. Maybe it had just been a bear or some other animal. But then the feeling returned, the sensation that something was watching us. I couldn't shake it. The terror from the woods had followed me back, and it wasn't going to leave until it had what it wanted. "Matt," I said, my voice shaking, "we need to leave. Now. I don't care what you think. I don't care about the mission. We're not safe here." He frowned, the confusion evident in his expression. "What are you talking about? You're not making any sense. There's nothing out there." I shook my head, frustration mounting. "You don't understand. There's something out there. It's not like anything we've seen before. It's not just a creature. It's something older. It's hunting us." Matt took a step toward me, clearly skeptical. "You're freaking out, man. Whatever it is, we can handle it. We've been through worse before." But I could hear it in his voice, the doubt, the uncertainty. He didn't believe me, and part of me understood why. I hadn't fully believed in the stories either, the rumors about the mountains, the whispers of things that didn't belong in this world. But now, standing there in front of him, I knew that I had been wrong. There was no escaping this, no fighting it. I took a deep breath and reached into my pack, pulling out my rifle. I didn't want to use it, didn't want to fire a shot unless absolutely necessary, but I knew that if things got worse, when things got worse, I had to be ready. Matt's eyes widened as he saw the rifle. "Wait, you're serious?" he asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "Matt," I said again, my tone more urgent now. "This isn't a joke. I'm not kidding around. We're being hunted." For the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. It was brief, but it was enough. He could see that I wasn't playing games anymore, that I wasn't exaggerating or overreacting. I had spent years in the woods, years training for emergencies just like this, and I had never been more certain of anything in my life. Just then, the wind shifted, and I felt it, an oppressive weight in the air, a subtle pressure that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The temperature dropped, and I knew that the creature was near. Matt seemed to sense it too, the change in the air, and his eyes flicked nervously toward the dark tree line. "That's it, isn't it?" he whispered, his voice low. "It's out there." I nodded, my grip tightening on the rifle. "It's out there, and it's coming for us." The silence in the air was suffocating, heavy with the weight of what was coming. Matt grabbed his pack, his hands shaking, and together, we began to prepare for what we feared would be the last fight of our lives. We gathered what supplies we could, making sure everything was ready to go, but I knew deep down that it might be too late. The forest had already claimed us. We were just waiting for it to make its move. And then through the trees we heard it again, the low growl, followed by that sickening clicking sound. It was closer this time. The creature had found us. The growl echoed through the trees, deep and guttural, reverberating in my chest like a warning. I stood frozen for a moment, the rifle in my hands feeling like a mere twig against the overwhelming terror creeping into my bones. Matt, too, had stopped in his tracks, his eyes wide as he scanned the shadows between the trees. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to run, to leave the forest behind, to get the hell out before it was too late. But something else gripped me, a determination I didn't know I had. I had spent years in these woods, first as a young ranger learning the lay of the land, then as a seasoned guide leading others. But nothing had prepared me for this. This wasn't a wild animal or a predator doing what predators do. This was something else, something ancient and filled with rage. I could feel the weight of the forest pressing in around us, as though the very ground beneath our feet was alive, watching us. The trees, silent and immovable, seemed to close in, their branches creaking under the strain of the atmosphere. But I refused to let fear paralyze me. "Matt," I whispered urgently, my voice low but steady. "We have to fight back." He didn't argue this time. The fear in his eyes was now mingled with something else, resolve. I saw it, the shift in him. He was no longer a naive adventurer. He was a man who had seen the impossible and was now determined to survive it. We both knew that if we were to escape with our lives, we had to face whatever hunted us head-on. We started by getting our bearings. The rifle felt heavy, but it was a comfort, at least for now. The creature's growls were getting closer, but there was no movement, no sign of it emerging from the darkness. Instead, I focused on our surroundings, looking for anything that could give us an edge. The wind had shifted again, carrying the scent of the creature closer, and I realized something important. It wasn't just the growls that gave it away. The forest itself was reacting to it, shifting in ways I had never noticed before, responding to its presence. The trees were unnaturally still, as if holding their breath. "We had to use that. Matt, we need to get to higher ground," I said, pointing to a ridge on the far side of the clearing. "We'll be able to see it coming from there." He didn't hesitate. We made our way toward the ridge, moving quickly but cautiously, staying low to the ground. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my focus on the task. As we neared the base of the ridge, the forest around us seemed to hold its breath, and I realized that the growling had stopped. That was worse than the noise. The silence told me everything I needed to know. The creature was stalking us, waiting for the right moment to strike. I looked at Matt, and for the first time in a long time, I could see the fear in his eyes, but I also saw a resolve I hadn't noticed before. He was scared, yes, but he wasn't backing down. He had grown in that moment, understanding that survival meant more than just escaping. It meant fighting, facing the unknown, even when every instinct told you to run. We reached the top of the ridge, where the sight was both terrifying and freeing. From here, I could see the forest stretching out for miles, the dense trees broken only by rocky outcrops and distant peaks. I kept my rifle trained on the darkness, my senses heightened, waiting for any sign of movement. We had to wait. There was no other choice. And then it came. The creature appeared in the clearing below, its massive form partially hidden by the undergrowth. Its eyes gleamed red in the darkness, the hunger in them palpable. For a moment, time seemed to freeze, and I couldn't move. Every part of me wanted to bolt, to run as fast as I could in the opposite direction. But then I remembered why I was there. I had to protect Matt. I had to protect us both. I leveled the rifle, aimed carefully, and took a deep breath. But before I could pull the trigger, the creature lunged, faster than I could have imagined. It moved with the swiftness of a predator, its claws tearing through the air. I fired instinctively, the gunshot reverberating in the air, but it missed. The creature snarled in rage, and in that instant, everything shifted. I had no choice but to fight. I grabbed Matt's arm, yanking him toward a cluster of boulders at the edge of the ridge. We ran, adrenaline fueling our movements, until we reached the safety of the rocks. The creature followed us, its growls reverberating in the air as it prowled the ridge below us, seeking a way up. We were trapped, but not for long. I didn't know how much time passed before the creature made its move, but the next thing I knew, I was crouching behind the boulders with Matt, my hands shaking as I loaded the rifle again. The creature was circling, its movements erratic, as if it were playing with us. I knew it was testing us, waiting for us to make a mistake. And then I realized something important. The creature wasn't just hunting us. It was trying to break us. It wanted us to give in to fear, to panic, to lose ourselves. It wanted us to become prey. That's when I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath, steadied my hands, and aimed the rifle. This time, I wasn't going to miss. The creature lunged, but I fired first. The shot rang out, sharp and true. The creature screeched, its body jerking violently as the bullet hit its target. It faltered for a moment, and then, in an explosion of fury, it retreated into the darkness. The woods were silent again, but I knew it wasn't over. We had survived the encounter, but it had changed us. In that moment, I realized something profound. Survival wasn't just about escaping. It was about facing your fears head-on, even when it felt like the world itself was out to get you. Matt and I had been forced to confront something much bigger than ourselves, and in doing so, we had become something stronger. We had grown, not just in our knowledge of the wilderness, but in our understanding of what it meant to truly fight for survival. The air had grown thick with tension, as though the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to break. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing on my chest, each second dragging by slower than the last. The moon was now fully obscured behind the clouds, plunging the landscape into an eerie, almost suffocating darkness. The sounds of the wilderness had fallen into an unnatural silence, and that stillness only heightened the growing sense of dread I could feel creeping up my spine. The forest was never this quiet, never this still. It was as though it, too, feared what was coming. We had made our way deeper into the woods, the rifle still clutched in my hands. The weight of it had become familiar by now, a lifeline, yet it offered little comfort against the vast unknown we were about to face. The monster, no, it wasn't just a wild animal, it was something older, something primal, was still out there. We had yet to see it fully, but I could feel its presence, like a shadow looming just beyond my vision, waiting for the right moment to strike. Matt's breathing was shallow beside me, and I could tell he was barely holding it together. He wasn't a seasoned ranger like I was, and the psychological toll of everything he had seen, everything we had encountered, was starting to show. His eyes darted from one tree to the next, searching for any sign of movement. He had always been the brave one, the adventurous spirit who sought out the unknown, but now that same curiosity had turned into fear, the kind that made even the most experienced tremble. "I'm not sure I can do this," he muttered, his voice barely a whisper in the oppressive silence. I placed a hand on his shoulder, my grip firm and reassuring. "You can," I said, though I wasn't so sure I believed the words myself. We were both in uncharted territory now, and not just because we were deep in the heart of these mountains. What we were up against wasn't something that could be rationalized or understood with logic. This was something that defied the very laws of nature. The night stretched on, the stillness only broken by the occasional rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig underfoot, as though the forest itself was mocking our fear. Every noise set my nerves on edge, and every time I thought I saw a movement in the trees, my heart would skip a beat. I kept my eyes trained on the path ahead, but every sense in my body was hyper-alert, waiting for the moment when the creature would reveal itself. It was then that I heard it, an almost imperceptible sound, like the brushing of fabric against bark. For the briefest of moments, I thought it might have been the wind, but something about it didn't feel natural. I glanced at Matt, who had heard it too. His eyes locked onto mine, wide with a mix of terror and realization. We were not alone. The moment of quiet anticipation was broken by a sudden, bone-chilling growl, a sound that was more felt than heard, reverberating through the earth beneath our feet. It was low and guttural, but it carried a weight, an undeniable force that seemed to pulse through the very trees. It wasn't a sound you could ignore. It was the sound of something that had been lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to make its move. It was like a predator's signal that it had found its prey. I raised my rifle, my fingers tight around the trigger, but I didn't fire. Not yet. We needed to be smart. I had spent enough years in the wild to know that you didn't engage a predator like this unless you had no other choice. A fight with this thing could end with one of us dead, or both. The creature hadn't revealed itself fully yet. We needed to make sure we didn't do anything that would provoke it prematurely. The forest had come alive again, the wind picking up, the leaves rustling in a way that felt almost intentional, as if the trees were whispering to each other, urging us to turn back. But we couldn't. We were too far in, and despite the fear gnawing at my insides, I knew that we had no choice but to face what was out there, whatever it was. "We need to set a trap," I said, my voice hoarse from the dry air. Matt didn't reply immediately, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He had the same thoughts I did. If we could predict the creature's movements, we might be able to catch it off guard. It was risky, terribly so, but it was the only shot we had. "We can't stay here much longer," he said finally, his voice taut with anxiety. "If it knows we're here, it'll just wait us out." I nodded, agreeing. The element of surprise was slipping away. I motioned to a nearby ridge, one that overlooked a steep drop. We could set up there, make ourselves less visible, and create a situation where the creature would be forced to reveal itself. It was a plan, but there were too many variables, too many unknowns. We gathered what little we could, more traps, more bait, anything that might help. My eyes never left the shadows, always watching, always waiting. The creature was out there, and I could feel it watching us in turn. The tension was unbearable. Every fiber of my being screamed for us to leave, but the decision had been made. As we prepared ourselves for what was coming next, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about facing the terror that had followed us through the forest, and somehow we had to conquer it. The creature may have been stalking us, but we would not become its prey. The battle was about to begin, and we had no choice but to fight. I took a deep breath, checked my rifle one last time, and moved into position. This was the final step, the last chance. Whatever happened next, there would be no going back. The silence of the forest was deafening, every sound amplified under the weight of impending danger. The shadows around me seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, the trees bending as if they were alive, whispering secrets of the land that had been kept hidden for generations. It was as though the mountain itself had a consciousness, watching our every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Matt and I were crouched low behind a cluster of boulders, the traps set and ready. The cold night air bit at our skin, but it was the chill in the pit of my stomach that made me shiver. The growl from earlier still echoed in my mind, a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through my bones. We were no longer in control, no longer just two men wandering through the wilderness. We were intruders in something ancient, something beyond our understanding. And now, we were about to face the consequence of that intrusion. I could feel it before I saw it, the shift in the atmosphere, the tension that had built up in the air now becoming unbearable. The ground seemed to pulse, a subtle movement beneath my feet, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. And then I saw it, just a flicker of movement in the distance, a flash of something too quick for my eyes to fully register, but enough to confirm that the creature was near. The predator had been circling us, toying with us, waiting for us to make the first move. Matt's hand gripped my shoulder, and I could feel his breath shallow against my back. We had both grown to fear the creature not just for its strength, but for its intelligence. This wasn't just an animal, it was a force, an ancient presence that knew the land far better than we ever could. It had the advantage. It had always had the advantage. But we weren't backing down now. I couldn't. Not after everything we had been through. Not after what I had seen. The sense of responsibility weighed on me, Matt's life, my own, and the lives of those who would come after us. This place, this cursed land, had to be stopped, or it would never let go of its secrets. I took another slow breath, steadying myself, then rose to my feet. The creature was close now, close enough that I could feel its eyes on me. But I wasn't afraid. No, I was angry. Angry that it had forced me into this situation, that it had pushed me and Matt to the brink of death. Angry that it had threatened the very balance of nature I had spent my life protecting. We moved quickly then, setting the trap in motion. The creature lunged from the darkness, a blur of muscle and fury, but it wasn't prepared for our calculated strike. The trap worked. The creature screamed in fury, but it was caught, bound, and rendered immobile. It writhed and howled, but we had won. But the victory was hollow. The creature wasn't just a predator. It was something far worse, an abomination, a twisted remnant of an ancient force that had no place in the world anymore. As it lay defeated, something strange happened. Its eyes, those eyes, no longer held malice. Instead, there was something else, a deep, sorrowful recognition. It wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a battle of two beings caught in the same cycle, both desperately fighting against forces beyond their control. We had won, but at what cost? I knew now that this land would never be the same for me. The mountains, the trees, the wilderness I had once loved had become something else. The curse of the creature lingered in the air, and its sorrowful eyes haunted me. Matt and I made our way back to civilization, but the journey was far from over. The world had changed, and so had we. We had faced something unimaginable, and now we carried its weight with us. The creature's death was not the end. It was just the beginning. I would never forget the forest, its whispers, or the lessons learned too late. The mountains of Alaska would forever haunt my dreams. The predator may have been vanquished, but the shadows it cast would never leave. And as I walked away, I knew one thing for sure: nothing would ever be the same. Months have passed since that night in the Alaskan wilderness, yet its memory clings to me like a shadow. I left the job, unable to look at the forests and mountains the same way again. At night, I still hear faint echoes of the creature's sorrowful cries, and its haunting gaze stays with me, a reminder of nature's mysteries and vengeance. I've become a wanderer, drifting from town to town, unable to settle, forever haunted by what I faced. The forests are not just trees and earth. They are alive, holding secrets that I will carry with me forever. If you ever find yourself near the Alaskan wilderness, or any forest with a dark past, think twice before venturing in. Some places are better left undisturbed, and some stories are better left untold. Respect the land, and heed the warnings of those who've walked the path before you. If you hear whispers in the woods, or notice a strange presence watching you, turn back. It's not worth the risk to your mind, body, or soul. Don't let curiosity guide you into the unknown, for sometimes, the unknown doesn't want to be found. Stay safe, stay smart, and stay aware.